Hi, everyone. We just wanted to give everybody a couple minutes to get here. We're so excited to welcome you to this presentation. Thank you so much for being here. So tonight we're talking about pilots, what they are and why we need them. First, though, we want to just give you an overview of the night so you know what to expect. We're going to talk about how Philly's schools are funded and why that's important and how that ties in to mega nonprofits and and how that ties into pilots. Then we're really excited to host a panel of students and a member of Penn's faculty to talk about their own experiences and why that's made them invested in this fight and why they're fighting for pilots. Then at the end, we're going to broadcast our demands to Mayor Kenny and other leaders of mega nonprofits, to call for establishing the Educational Equity Fund and to demand Philly's mega nonprofits pay pilots. So, Philly's schools. I think everybody here knows that Philly's schools are critically underfunded. We see it in our buildings, in our classrooms, in our bathrooms, in our textbooks, in our school lunches, and we see it in the lack of counselors and nurses in our schools. And it's important to understand where the funding that we do have comes from and also why we're so lacking in funding. Pennsylvania is one of only 3 states that doesn't have a comprehensive school finance formula that distributes state funding to individual districts. The fair funding formula that does exist in Pennsylvania is really ineffective because it only distributes a really small amount of our state education budget, only 10%. So as you can see, nearly half of our school budget is coming from local contributions. And when Philly is the poorest big city in the country, it doesn't make any sense for our city to be carrying so much of our school budget. That's why districts like Lower Merion are spending thousands more per students than districts like Philadelphia. And when we look at where that local revenue is coming from, the majority of it is coming from real estate tax, 56%. Yet 17% of the city's property, worth nearly $30 billion in taxes, is tax exempt, which seems crazy because that's a huge amount of lost potential for funding for Philly schools. And so we wonder how can there be this much tax exempt property in Philadelphia? And in short, the answer is mega nonprofits. And when we say mega nonprofits, what are these things? Who are we talking about? Mega nonprofits are in an entirely different category than what you first think of when you hear nonprofit. These aren't small organizations that operate on little or no property or make very little money. We're talking about massive organizations that are large landowners, they're large employers, and they have really big annual budgets, usually over $500 million a year. And it seems really counterintuitive. Like, how can these massive organizations that are making so much money be nonprofits? But they are nonprofits despite their size and the amount of revenue they make per year. And the important part in that is that they're exempt from the same property taxes that every other nonprofit is. So the small charity is getting exempt from the same property taxes that these massive organizations are. So what do these organizations look like in Philadelphia? Well, some of the largest are our universities like Penn, Drexel, and Jefferson. These are examples of mega nonprofits in Philadelphia. So when we look at institutions like Penn, which is the largest private landowner and employer in Philadelphia with over 30,000 employees, we're talking about institutions that are sitting on billions of dollars. I can't emphasize enough how wealthy these organizations, and especially Penn is, even amongst its other mega nonprofits. As the 6th wealthiest university in the United States, it has a $6.6 billion annual budget and a $9.3 billion endowment. I mean, this is a huge, very wealthy institution. And I hope that it's becoming increasingly apparent that these, quote, nonprofits aren't exactly nonprofits. These are for-profit institutions, but their qualification as nonprofits has been exempting them from contributing to the city and the communities within it that have been sustaining them. And it's been doing that for a long time. And so what do these institutions say to this? Well, most of them say, we've already done enough and our hands are tied. Penn talks about its funding of the Penn Alexander School and its development of University City and its private police force and developments in water and sewage. And these are civic contributions. But that can't be where it ends for Penn. They can do both. They can certainly afford to do both, and they should be doing both. Penn has no excuse. Six out of the 7 other Ivy League schools not only contribute civically to their communities, but also pay pilots to their respective cities. And these institutions in Philadelphia need to do more. They love to claim on brochures and on websites and on these pretty pictures that they are part of the Philly community. But when it comes to stepping up and funding our schools and being a part of that community, they chicken out every single time, and they're not part of that community. And they should be ashamed of that. In fact, in 2011, the largest pilot donation from a tax-exempt nonprofit in Philadelphia came from a retirement community. It's insane that a retirement community is voluntarily paying our city almost $300,000, while our universities that sit on billions of dollars aren't paying a single cent to the city for our schools. But let's back up a second. What are we asking for here? So Malcolm is going to dive into what pilots are and the history of the fight for them.
So we do have a solution for these organizations which are exempt from paying property taxes, and they're called pilots, or payments in lieu of taxes. This is a voluntary payment made by mega nonprofits to the city in order to compensate for them not paying property tax. So we believe that these mega nonprofits should be paying pilots, and also the pilots should be going into something called what we're calling an education equity fund, which so that these mega nonprofits don't just get to arbitrarily choose where they want to put their pilot money. And I'll talk more about the education equity fund later. We are saying the payments would still only be 40% of the estimated property tax, so they're not paying the full amount, so they shouldn't necessarily be complaining too much. And there is a precedent, like Lola already said. Large Ivy League universities in other cities already play this, with Harvard making a $10 million pilot contribution in 2012. So there is a precedent for other universities and mega nonprofits to be doing this. So there is a history of the fight for pilots in Philadelphia. In the 1990s, Philadelphia had a pretty robust pilot program with payments of about $9 million a year from different organizations. However, due to a state legislature also in the 90s, Philadelphia lost its ability to threaten a nonprofit status. So they lost their bargaining power with these mega nonprofits, and quickly they started losing their pilot money. By 2000, the payments had gone from about $9 million to only $800,000 a year. When elected in 2015, Mayor Jim Kenney ran on a platform to pressure mega nonprofits into paying their share in our city. However, clearly he has not fulfilled this promise, and organizations like Penn, Drexel, and Jefferson still get away with not paying their share to the city. So we demand that Mayor Kenney establish an education equity fund in order to ensure transparency and fairness in allocating pilot money directly to Philadelphia public schools. So this is that education equity fund I was talking about earlier. Again, so that these mega nonprofits can't just arbitrarily assign their pilot money to things that don't actually need to get done. This should be money to put out the immediate fires that we have right now in the Philadelphia school district. And it also should be publicly controlled so that, again, there can be transparency and fairness in this where the funds go.
And so that was just the first chunk of information, and we'd love to take your questions. Any questions you have, leave them in the comments, and we're gonna try to answer them after our panelists speak. But for now, we're really excited to welcome our 5 panelists. And today it's gonna be a pretty brief panel, but the question that they're all focusing on is, how does your experience as a student in the Philadelphia School District or as a member of the Philadelphia community inform your decision to fight for pilots? And our first speaker is Zion.
Hi, I'm Zion. I'm a student at SLA Beaver, and I fight for pilots because our district is in dire need of funding. I've attended a Philadelphia public school my entire life, and I've never experienced a restroom that wasn't in complete derelict. A restroom that has soap, toilet paper, and working hot water 24/7. A restroom where the stalls closed completely without one of my classmates having to hold the door shut. Food that students actually wanted to eat, not something that resembles canned cat food. For a lot of students, these are the only meals they receive, so why are they subjected to such trash? I fight for pilots because I feel like our schools deserve proper heating and cooling systems year-round. We deserve healthy, organized environments 24/7. Parents shouldn't have to worry about sending their child into a cancerous environment when they send them into a classroom. They shouldn't have to worry about possibly subjecting their child to educators who are racist, homophobic, sexist, because the school district would have the means to fund proper trainings. I fight for pilots because it shouldn't take a global pandemic for more than 75% of our public schools to have updated technology. These are necessities. These are not extreme asks. And this is the youth coming to the adults to make the right decisions in order for us to receive the necessities that we not only need, but deserve. Thanks, Lola, for the question.
Thank you, Zion. That was incredible. And our next speaker is Sinai.
Okay, hi. I'm Sanaya, and I attend Parkway Center City High School. And my issue is not only with the building, but it is also with, more importantly, the nurses and the counselors. For the schools that do have nurses and counselors, they're not present on an everyday basis. Some nurses and counselors also lack seriousness and empathy in many situations involving students. And another reason is, when the school year returns, many students will have suffered from emotional trauma because of the pandemic and the deaths caused by it. Students will be left emotionally and physically scarred, and they need a strong support system full of representatives that we will know help us and do the best that they can to support us. I become irate when I go to a counselor with an issue and they put the slightest amount of effort into it. Another viewpoint is that it's difficult for counselors to be compassionate and understanding because they're responsible for a numerous amount of students. In many cases, 1 to 2 counselors supervise over 600 students. That's not enough counselors for that amount of students. So dealing with so many students is very unmanageable and stressful. This is another reason why we need more funding for guidance counselors and nurses. If mega nonprofits help fund Philadelphia schools, that will help ease many problems such as emotional stress on staff and students, better learning environments, and better relationships between the staff and the students. We need more counselors and nurses that are actually understanding, serious, and concerned about their students. We all want to be cared about. We all want to feel safe, and we all want to be understood. So we need our school mothers and fathers to step up and help us fight for the funding that we need. We may be young, but we're far from young-minded. We see the unfairness and the stinginess in funding, and we're speaking about it, but our voices don't seem to be heard. So please listen to our voices. We are in need and help, not just from pilots, but from everyone else in this community. Thank you for the question, Lula.
Thank you so much, Sinai. That was really powerful. And next we have Kate.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kate. I go to Central High School. I hope everyone's doing well. I'm going to switch it up a little bit by kind of talking about my experience going to Central and just comparing Central to other schools in the district. Central is really unique in that we have a huge alumni association. my school's been around for hundreds of years, and we have received millions of dollars from our alumni association. So this is not to say that our bathrooms are not also in deplorable condition, and we have 5 counselors for the 2,600 students that are in our school. But we do have some resources that many other schools don't. We have a beautiful library that was recently renovated. We have a performing arts building in the works that was funded by our alumni association. And when I look at that and compare that to the other schools in the district that are struggling to give their students basic resources such as technology and books, I think that that's just absolutely awful. Every single student in the Philadelphia School District deserves a school that is properly funded. They deserve the resources that can allow them to do homework before school in the library, and to cultivate their interest in programs that matter and are well funded. And the fact that only my school has a group of people who are funding us and who actually care to contribute to the lives of students and to improve their well-being is just beyond my understanding. I think that it is completely unfair that one school can have these resources. Meanwhile, the rest of the schools are so underfunded. And if Penn spent endowment dollars and real estate tax dollars on the Philadelphia School District as a whole, I truly believe that all of the schools in the Philadelphia School District can enjoy these same opportunities that Central High School students can. Going back to what I said before, this does not mean that Central does not have tons of problems. We still deal with a shortage of nurses and counselors, and the hallways are gross and the classrooms are gross and the books are dated. But I do feel that if we didn't have an alumni association that was funding us as this major benefactor, then we wouldn't have anything at all. And many other schools are working with that. So I'm just here because I believe that Penn and the other organizations in Philadelphia need to pay, sorry, I'm getting a little backtracked, need to pay these dollars to fund our district because we need it, and it is so vital because we are growing people, and if we are taught as young kids that we don't deserve the resources that other people get, we're going to grow up thinking that way, and that is not okay. That's all.
Thank you so much, Kate. That was awesome. Our next speaker is Henry.
Wow, those were some wonderful speeches, everybody. This is rather spontaneous that I joined, but I'm going to try to do my best. It's not going to be anywhere near as good as your guys' points, but going to Magnets High School in Philadelphia, Palumbo, I've noticed a lot of students that are college bound or want to go to college, but come senior year, they're sort of confused in the process of applications just because we don't have official college counselors. Our student body is about 1,000 students, and there's only two counselors for the entire school, and often students that are really trying to make their application good really struggle because the counselors are already overwhelmed with so many students and don't really have the time. And also I'm going into my senior year, and throughout my years in high school, I've been fortunate enough to have extremely dedicated teachers. And I've noticed they've been underfunded in almost every capacity, including classroom materials, teaching, technology, what have you. And I definitely feel like these mega nonprofit organizations need to pay up to give these dedicated teachers what they deserve in order to teach successfully. Yeah.
Thank you, Henry. That was fantastic.
That's all I got.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. And our final panelist is Professor Justin McDaniel.
Hi, everybody. It's a real honor to be here speaking with such bright young students from really every part of the city. We have students from West Philadelphia and North Philadelphia and Northeast and South. And so it's really great to see you all stepping up and demanding that you get treated fairly. As Lola said, and other people have reiterated, and Aiden, who is organizing this, has stressed as well, that mega nonprofits in Philadelphia contribute nothing in terms of pilots. The University of Pennsylvania, where I am a professor, is the only Ivy League institution that doesn't contribute pilots. So Harvard and Cornell and Columbia and Dartmouth and Brown and Yale, they all contribute some amount, usually around $10 to $12 million, which is nowhere near the amount that they should. Malcolm mentioned his proposal that 40% of what Penn would pay in property taxes, and Penn is the largest property owner in the city, and also the largest employer in the city. If they actually paid their property taxes, they would be about $500 million a year, and they don't pay any of that. So 40% of that would be would be a good start. And if they had done that, they paid pilots in this way, they would have paid $36.4 million last year. And that would have been only 0.3%, not 3%, but 0.3%. No, 0.3 of percent of their actual endowment. Lola mentioned that the endowment at Penn was over $9 billion. And that's a lot, but it's actually $14.7 billion this year. So it's a lot more than she even said. And so if they paid this, it would only be 0.3% of their endowment, but also even if they just paid it out of their operating budget, it would be less than 1/3 of 1% of their annual, not annual budget, annual revenues. And so this would be a great way of helping the public schools in the city, of which most of their budget comes from property taxes. And just to explain to you how dire the city's public schools are for cash, is that the school district estimates that this year it will cost $125 million just to remove asbestos. And Zion mentioned this to like cancerous environments, and she's absolutely right. And also not just to remove asbestos, but also remove lead paint from schools. Lead paint hasn't been used in the United States since 1972, the year I was born. But we still have so many schools that are so much older than that they still have lead paint in them. And this is is proven to be quite dangerous. And these are just basic maintenance issues. We're not talking, like Henry mentioned, about supplies, technology. We're not talking, like Sanaya was mentioning, nurses and counselors, and what Kate was talking about in terms of counselors. Not talking about food and all of these things, improvements in all of these areas that this amount of money would help. And I want to stress just another thing about my employer. So I worked at the University of Pennsylvania for 12 years. And I like working here. I love my students. I meet, hundreds of wonderful students a year, and I like my colleagues and I like the administration. And so this is not me attacking my employer, but let's just take an example of salaries. Penn's hired executives, presidents, deans, provosts, and things like that. If they just contributed 20% of their salaries. For example, the president of the University of Pennsylvania is one of the highest paid university presidents in the nation. In some estimates, she's the second highest paid, but I'm not exactly sure that. But I know she makes over $4 million a year. And so that's a good salary. She works hard. She's earned her salary, so I'm not criticizing that. And other deans are making well over $500,000 or $800,000 a year. And that they work very hard and they've earned their positions. But presidents and executives and deans and provosts at places like Duke and many other institutions across this country, including many of the Ivy League schools, have voluntarily, because of the budget crisis, have taken a small pay cut, 10 to 15 to 20% pay cut. If executives did that this year at Penn, that would be $10 million that they could contribute to the public school system just in this year. That's a short-term fix. It's not a long-term fix, but it would be a great gesture in this year of with COVID-19 and the budget crisis and the massive unemployment we're facing, just to show a gesture of goodwill. Lola mentioned, and I think she mentioned this really well, that Penn advertises in its advertisement to parents and to students and in its public relations that they are a member of the city of Philadelphia and that they're a good neighbor and that they contribute to the city. And there's many ways that they do contribute to the city, of course. However, that they don't contribute in terms of what the amount of money that they have in their budget and anywhere near what they would do if they actually have property taxes. And so how good of a neighbor can you actually be if you're looking at the educational institutions, the public schools, the lifeblood of this city's future, and you are not contributing any of that in terms of property taxes or in terms of pilots or in terms of direct donations. And so that we at Penn for Pilots, and I'm one of the founding members of Penn for Pilots, a group of professors at the University of Pennsylvania from various different colleges here. We as employees of the university really want to stress that we can afford this and that we have a moral duty and a civic duty to contribute to the children of our city. And if we want those children to be bright, productive, interesting citizens and contribute to the public and civic good of our city and beyond, that at least we could do, especially if we want some of them or many of them to be students at our own university, is that we could give them a good start. We could give them a good start in the public education. And so that's why, even though I am lucky, or I'm not, I don't know, I'm very happy to be employed by the University of Pennsylvania, that I feel that it is a moral responsibility and a civic responsibility to ask my employer to help our city's children. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor McDaniel, and all of our panelists. That was awesome. And now we're just going to answer one of the questions that was asked in the comments. The question is, why not fight for more funding from the city of Philadelphia instead of or in addition to pilots? And Zion is going to be answering this one.
Well, like I said, the youth is asking the adults to make the right decision. This is not a singular ask. We're not just asking for pilots. We've been asking the adults. I can say for myself, I'm in at least 2 meetings a week with city council members or Kevin Bethel or Dr. Hyde or the school board asking for funding, even if that's like to get police out of school so we can have more funding for the things that we've all discussed, the needs that we've listed in the panel. So we have been asking. Yeah, this isn't something new. We've been asking, and the answer is always the same. The answer is always not enough money. So because it's not enough money, because they don't have the means, we're asking for pilots as well as, changing their own budget around in order for us to have the necessities. Like I said, these are things that we need.
Thank you, Zion. Okay, here's another one. What can we do as individuals outside of these organizations to push for pilots? That's a great question, and it's really important because the city can't force these organizations to pay pilots. All our city officials and we can do is place pressure on the people in these organizations, these institutions like Penn and Drexel, who can make these decisions. It's something they have to do voluntarily. And we're going to talk about some ways that we've created and we've provided for you to take action. And that's going to come at the end of the presentation. And we'd love for you to participate in that. Here's another one. Penn pays property taxes on some of its buildings, such as Penn Ovation. The university is also forecasting a budget deficit of $91 million for fiscal year 2021. Sorry, I haven't gotten the rest of that question yet. Just give me a second, sorry. I'm sorry, I'm missing the second half of that question, but I get the gist of what the person was saying.
Sorry, I can tackle that question. Sorry about that. This time, Penn does pay on Penn Ovation. This is it's a new building that they've they've built, but they don't pay taxes, property tax on the vast majority of their buildings. But so this is a difficult year, and that there's, it's a difficult year for Penn. It's a difficult year for the nation, but Penn can't afford this. And I'm referring to the pennforpilots.org. So you just go to pennforpilots.org, frequently asked questions, and we talk about this actual question. So I'm just going to read a little bit from this. Penn can certainly afford to pay pilots. Moreover, it can and should do without endangering its core educational and research mission. There is no trade-off to make between fulfilling our responsibility to the public schools of Philadelphia and fulfilling our responsibilities to our students and colleagues. There are multiple ways that Penn can generate tens and even hundreds of millions of dollars, even in time of economic crisis. And these are 3 examples. 1, endowment spending. Penn's endowment in June 2019 was $14.7 billion. And Penn can choose to spend a slightly larger percentage of that endowment each year. The endowment has grown over 17-fold in the last 3 decades, from $125 million in 1991. However, through investments, the endowment has grown on average at a higher rate than is contributed to the university's operating budget. The 1-year return average has been 9.11% since 1991 and 7.46% since 2009, whereas budgetary support has not surpassed 5.5% since 1991. In 1981, when the US and the world were facing an economic crisis, not unlike our present one, the university spending rate was 6.7% of the endowment for the operating budget. Today, if Penn increased its spending from 5 to 7%, the maximum allowed by Pennsylvania law, it would generate an additional $232 million for the operating budget, enough to completely wipe away the $91 million projected budget deficit for this year, and make a substantial contribution to the Educational Equity Fund, the one which Malcolm is referring to, for the Philadelphia Public Schools. Administrators at Penn have publicly acknowledged that they could spend more of the endowment than they do. They simply prefer not to increase spending as much beyond 5% a year, even as a short-term measure. We question that decision at Penn for Pilots and the priorities it conveys. We are not alone in our judgment. Legal scholars have long challenged the arguments commonly heard for redistricting and restricting endowment spending at wealthy universities. Second point, or second reason Penn can afford it: reducing salaries for highly compensated administrators. As I said before, if some of our highly paid administrators, just the 39 highest paid employers that reduce their salary by 20%, it would save $9.9 million. And these could go to help the public schools. And then borrowing. Extraordinary harsh economics years, this is 2002, the university's debt rose 90% of its value of endowment. In 2008, there was a massive economic turndown. The university debt was equal to 61% of the endowment. In 2019, Penn's total liabilities are the equivalent of 58% of endowment. As we faced a new economic recession right now, Penn might consider contracting debt in a way that it did in 2001 and 2008, given our extraordinary low interest rates. And so these are just 3 ways that Penn could afford to pay this, even in this economic crisis.
Thank you so much, Professor McDaniel. Sorry for the earlier lapse in communication. And so this is exactly what the person earlier, the question earlier referenced. We are calling everyone in this audience and everyone who cares about public education in Philadelphia, we're calling you to action. So we've created a link tree that has several links that can easily take you to these actions and make it something you can accomplish in 5 minutes. We need 5 minutes of your time to address our elected officials, Mayor Kenny, and the leaders of these institutions, including Drexel and Penn. In addition to emails, there are some email formats on that link tree, by the way. Just click it and it'll help you send an email. And for the emails, don't forget to add the subject line and insert your own personal information. There's a spot for your name, and if you want to, your district or neighborhood. And of course, we highly encourage you to add your own experiences to the email or write your own email. That's what's going to make this fight impactful. It's exactly what Kate and Zion and Sinai and talked about. Like, these are the issues in our schools, and we see them every day, and we need pilots. So In addition to emails, we also are encouraging you to comment on the Instagrams of Penn and Drexel. We think it's a really public way to make them feel the shame that we believe they should feel. And so fill their comments with what you've learned from today or why you believe they should pay pilots. And looking forward, we're working with Jobs for Justice. They've prepared a week of action that's coming up in the last week of July, and we would love for you to be a part of it. That's another way to take action. There's also a link on the link tree where you can find out more information about that and get involved with their campaign for pilots in Philadelphia. So here's that. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Please take the 5 minutes. This can't end at this presentation. It goes so much further than this. And we need to make sure that our elected officials and the leaders at the top of these institutions hear what we're saying and hear our experiences and know that we're paying attention and we're mad about this and we care. And we're not going to stop until something changes. So thank you so much. There'll be another information session next Thursday, and we can't wait to see you again. Thank you.